Welcome everybody, I'm Gene Luthkey. I'm on the board of directors for the Carnegie Historical Museum, and today we have Mike Burggraaf with us. Mike is a collector of bottles, stoneware, does stained glass restoration, and a number of other things. He's a member of the Iowa Bottlers Association. He has recently written a book on Iowa bottles and has quite a nice collection and is really knowledgeable about bottles, their manufacture, their use, and a lot of other things. Mike?
Okay, thanks, Gene. I started collecting when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I actually wasn't collecting, but I was a typical young boy, and grew up on a farm, and we were on a 100-year-old farm, and I was kind of snooping around the barn one day, nothing better to do, and I found some old bottles in the sideboards of the barn. And I thought, oh, this is something different. We'll explore here for a while, and I pulled out quite a few bottles and had no idea that anybody would actually collect them, but I thought they were neat, so I saved them. And I remember one of them being a Mexican Mustang liniment bottle from the 1890s, and that's a bottle I still have, by the way, which I've had for quite a while, and a few soda bottles and some whiskey bottles. And eventually I found out that there were other people that were crazy enough to collect antique bottles, and from there my knowledge grew, and I ended up joining the Iowa Bottle Club at some point in time and read as many books as I could, and then at some point in time I started going to bottle shows, started buying and selling bottles, and it's taken me to the point where I'm at today, and I eventually completed a book that took me only 12 years to finish, but the book is finished, and I'll talk about the book a little bit later. What I'd like to do, I've brought just a small cross-section of different bottles to try to be as informative as possible and try to give you as much information as possible about bottles that I could. I'll be talking about manufacture, how colors are derived for different bottles, different types of bottles such as medicines, bitters, sodas, etc. And then a little bit on just some local history with some of the soda bottles that I've brought. I actually could probably give you a 3 or 4 hour program on bottles if I were to bring all the different types that I have, but we're trying to condense it here as short as we can. If we stop back and think about bottles in America, first of all, bottles have been around for a couple of thousand years as far as documentation has been, but as far as the United States is concerned, glass blowing and the making of glass bottles was a big business in the United States. In fact, glass blowers were some of the better paid workers in the United States, and almost all of them were immigrants from Europe, mostly Germans, especially the mold makers. If you were a good glass blower, you wouldn't have any trouble securing a job once you arrived in the United States. It was in fact, it was very prestigious to be a glass blower. The problem with a lot of the glass houses, it's probably a pretty obvious one, is you have to have kilns which are fired at a high temperature so you can blow the glass. A lot of the glass houses burnt down, and they also used a lot of wood for their fire supply. So once their supply of trees ran out, especially in a larger metropolitan area where there's a lot of house building going on, the glass house would either close down or they'd have to find another location. My first two examples that I'm going to talk about to try to explain the earliest manufacture of the bottles, and I'm going to be talking about a word that's called the Pontil mark. And when I talk about the Pontil mark, it's a means of manufacture. It's also a way we can date how old a bottle is, as a general rule. First bottle that I have here, and it's kind of a rough looking thing, and it's not particularly attractive, but I use it for an example, and it's not exactly uniform. This is an 1830s ale bottle. And we'll probably pass this around, and as you look at the bottom of it, you'll be able to see that the bottom has a kick up on it that's been pushed in, and if you look very, very closely, you'll be able to see some indentations here from another tool, and that tool is the Pontil rod. Now if you can envision this, and this is a free blown bottle, by the way, which means it was not blown in a mold. A glass blower used either a slab of marble to roll the bottle out on his blowpipe to get it to this shape, or they had clay and wooden molds that they used very briefly to get the basic shape. And it was taken out, and then the rest was finished as the free blown method. The neck was attached to the blowpipe, of course. So if you can envision this, we've got a 4-foot long glass tube or pipe, and this bottle is on the end of it. Problem the glass blower has to do is get the bottle off of the glass pipe, the blowpipe. So what they did in the early 1800s, from 1800 up to about the Civil War period, in other words, 1860s is about the time period when these Pontil marks disappeared, they would have a young boy, this was real common to have a lot of young boys working in a glass house, and they would have a glass rod that was preheated on the end, and they would attach this glass rod, which is usually about 3 to 4 feet long. They would attach it to the bottom of the bottle while it was still in that plastic state. In other words, the bottle is holding its shape, but it hasn't cooled off yet. The bottle is solidified, so it'll hold its shape, but it hasn't cooled off yet. That's how the glass rod can be attached to the bottom of it, and it will stick. So now if you can imagine this, we've got a glass rod stuck on the bottom of the bottle. So here's this boy, and he's hanging onto this rod, and he's got gloves, of course, and the glass blower takes a pair of shears. If you can envision this, it's like a pair of scissors, and they cut off the blowpipe. That's how they detach the blowpipe from the bottle. The next thing they have to do is they have to get a lip on top of the bottle. And there's a lot of different ways they can put lips on the bottles. And when I get to the historical flask, I'll show one of the easiest ways. So while this bottle is still on the Pontil, the glass blower would take a little glob of glass, glob it on the end, and then he had a lipping tool that would form this lip. Now, by this time, the bottle is getting cooler and cooler. In fact, it's getting to the point after a few minutes that the bottle can be handled with a pair of gloves or a pair of tongs. Now, the bottle is almost complete except for what? What's still on the bottle? Yeah, we got this Pontil rod stuck out here. We got a completed bottle, but we've still got this Pontil rod on here. So what do? They have to break that off. And one of the ways they did it, they'd take a wet string and wrap it around the Pontil and snap that off. Sometimes the bottom, if it was really rough, they would refire it by taking the bottle and sticking it back in the opening of the kiln and refiring it, and that would smooth it off a little bit. This Pontil isn't super pronounced, but it is pretty obvious because the bottle has been pushed up, and when I pass this around, you'll be able to see how crude it is. And I'm sure everybody here will be careful, but we all know the funny thing about glass, if we drop it, it breaks. So, but we're not too worried about this one. So we'll pass that around. You can kind of look at it and say, boy, that's one crude looking bottle. And you have to think about the time period. They didn't care how perfect it was. Glass blowers were working on production. They cranked them out. So unless it was a specialty piece, they didn't take much time on a bottle and make sure it's perfect.
Mike, what pushes it in at the bottom, the whole bottle?
On this particular bottle,
The bottle is pushed in at the bottom.
right here, because the Pontil rod, the end of it is probably about that big around in this case. I'm going to talk about a couple other Pontils in a little bit so you can.
Spell
Pontil. Now I've got a small free-blown medicine bottle here. You can see it's got paneled sides on it. This one was formed with the aid of wooden paddles on the side. That's how the glass blower helped form this one. This is a free-blown bottle also. And it's got a rolled lip on it. So if you can envision this, we have a Pontil on the end of the bottle again. He sheared the lip off, and then he had a tool. He just folded that lip over. He didn't add any glass in this time. He just folded that lip over. And whoever made this bottle did a pretty good job because the Pontil mark is very faint. That was a sign of a good glass blower. If there wasn't a real jagged or rough Pontil mark, it was a sign of a good glass blower. And this is a real faint Pontil mark on the end of this. This is like I said, an late 1820s, early 1830s medicine bottle. It's the oldest bottle that I've brought here along with the ale bottle. We'll pass this one around also.
Were they closed with corks?
Yeah, almost all the bottles that I have here were sealed with corks. That was the common device. Now I've got a small medicine bottle here. The name's kind of amusing on it, and when I get to the medicine section, we'll expand on this. It says bear's oil. And actually it was oil extracted from a bear, I assume, but who knows? Who knows with the medicine industry. This is an 1840s medicine bottle, and I don't know how many you can see this, but this Pontil mark is very, very pronounced. There is a round ring of glass. This had a small Pontil rod on it because it's a small bottle. And if you were to be up here up close with the bottle on the table, the Pontil mark sticks out so far that the bottle won't even set level. In fact, that's a real common problem with high production bottles. They snapped that Pontil off, and if a little bit was sticking out, they said, well, let's go to the next one. They didn't care. They tried to shove them out as fast as they could. I've got kind of a large bottle here. If we put this in front of the light box, you can kind of see how dense the color is. In fact, there's not much light coming through it at all. A lot of times this is referred to as black glass. The first bottle that we're passing around, that's a common term that they call this color, is black glass. It's not actually black glass, it's dark olive green. That was a cheap glass for the glass houses. And the consumers liked the dark glass because it protected the contents. That's an ale bottle. This is a storage bottle. It protected the contents from sunlight. So they liked that dark color. And the glass house sure loved it because that was the cheapest glass they had. That was made with iron oxides. Boy, that was the cheapest glass they could make, so they loved making black glass. Now, if you look at this Demijohn, which is a storage bottle, large storage bottle, and if you look at the base of this one, I don't know if you can see that ring on the bottom or not, we've got a different Pontil mark here. It's the same procedure. In other words, and this is a big bottle, so you think about the weight of this. This is a big bottle. This has an iron Pontil. Instead of using a glass Pontil, they used an iron rod. And look at the diameter of that circle on the bottom. That was a pretty big Pontil to handle. So you've got a 9-year-old boy that's got this Pontil rod, and he's got this big bottle on the end of it. I'm sure that was a struggle for him. This is a small Demijohn, by the way, because they made them in 2 and 3 and 4 gallon sizes also. So it would have been a struggle, and sometimes they had to use the aid of baskets and wood boards and things like that to help hold the bottle. This particular bottle, if you were to look at it closely after the presentation, you can see where there's a couple of marks here on the neck. They've had a pair of iron tongs to help hold onto this bottle while the glass blower tooled the top. And that's kind of rare, but you can see right where those tongs were on the neck because of the weight of the bottle. That was to aid in that, as far as the manufacture. Now I've got one more Pontil mark here to show you. This is probably the best example of an iron Pontil. And this is just a common, it's called a scroll flask. They used to call them violin flasks. And it's kind of a neat bottle. It's got some neat designs on it, but you can maybe see why they come up with the name scroll flask. It's a whiskey flask. And these are the types of bottles that they would send to a saloon, and the saloon keeper or the liquor dealer would fill those with out of his barrel, and that's why there's no space for a label on it, or no liquor dealer's name on it. They just filled the bottles at the saloon or the liquor dealer's house, and then he sold them from there. If you look on the base of this bottle, if you look closely, there is an oval reddish mark on the bottom of this flask. And if you can't see this, I'll be glad to come by and show this one to you closer. It has an oval reddish mark here. This is another iron Pontil mark. And the reason the iron Pontils show up as a reddish oxide like this, if you think about this a little bit, anytime you heat metal, especially steel or iron, and let it cool off, it forms an oxide on it. The Pontil rods were continuously being heated up and cooled off, so there's always oxide on the end of the iron Pontil. When it's attached to the bottle, that stays on there until the glass blower breaks it off. That's why the iron oxide residue from the Pontil rod sticks to the glass. Iron Pontils started being used around probably 1850, and they were phased out by the end of the Civil War. So an iron Pontil mark, you can really pinpoint the date of your bottle. Now keep in mind, when I say after Civil War, they didn't use Pontil marks very much. They were improving their methods of glassblowing all the time. That doesn't necessarily mean if you have a Pontil bottle, it's absolutely made before 1865. It's not a guarantee. There's always an overlap period. In fact, some glass houses, especially on specialty items, some bottles would have Pontil marks clear up into the 1880s. But as a general rule, the Pontil marks are phased out after the Civil War, after the 1865. Now the first bottles that I want to talk about as a general group are historical flasks. The scroll flask that I showed you was one of them already, and this one we've already talked about. Again, this is a whiskey flask. Almost all the historical flasks I'm going to show you contain whiskey or liquor or some type of alcoholic beverage. And keep in mind, the time period we're talking about here, 1830s to 1860, 1870. This was a scroll flask that we talked about. We've got a quart whiskey flask here, and it has a Pontil mark on it. This was probably a late 1840s whiskey flask. And we have George Washington on one side and Thomas Jefferson on the other side. I hardly think that today's presidents would let their portraits be on a whiskey bottle, but back then this was very acceptable. And it was because of the way the liquor was talked about and accepted at the time period. So you'll find lots of flasks with presidents embossed on the front and back side. Oh, by the way, the lips I was talking about, I said a tooled lip. This is a sheared lip. And this will give you a real good idea. This lip was sheared off while it was on the Pontil mark with the shears. It was refired. They put it back in the opening of the kiln to smooth off that lip. And that was it. And they didn't have to do anything to it. That's why it's called a sheared lip. That was the quickest and easiest way to make a lip on the top of their bottles. I've got an olive amber flask here. I've got 3 of these that are of this type. And it's an open Pontil flask, kind of crude. And on it is a horse and kind of a wagon. It also has the words, "Success to the railroad." Now when we think about a railroad locomotive, we usually think about the big steam engines. When actually the first railroad, and somebody may have trouble seeing this, the first railroad was devised with limestone pillars, and rails were put on the pillars, and then either a mule or a horse hauled the wagons on those rails. And the first one, this is 1826, first railroad, 1826, was in Quincy, Massachusetts. And what they're hauling, now this is the neat thing about it, this is the first load ever carried on a railroad. What they're hauling are the stones for the Bunker Hill Monument, which is pretty neat when you think about that. That was the first load. Well, anyway, this rail idea, of course we know what it is like today, this was fantastic in 1826. And they really wanted to promote this as a means of transportation, so they did all types of advertising to promote this. One of the ways they did it was with this flask. This is what's embossed on this flask. It says, "Success to the railroad." In other words, they want this to succeed. This is going to be a big thing. And they have the horse-drawn or the mule-drawn wagon on that. So that's what is on this flask. I'd love to pass some of these around, but we're going to leave most of these up here. So this is the "Success to the railroad" flask. A commemorative flask, if you will, is used to promote the railroad. This was a means of advertising, glass bottles with the promotion on it. I've got a little newer flask here. It's an aqua, which by the time the 1840s, 1850s rolled around, aqua was the cheap glass. Aqua, a lot of people say, well, that's a blue bottle, that's a green bottle. The correct term is aqua. And I'll show you the difference between green and blue in a little bit, but this is referred to as aqua, that light bluish color. Now, as we look at this bottle, on one side it has a row of 13 stars, the word Union, then it has two hands shaking, and they refer to that as the clasped hands. On the other side we have a Civil War cannon and a pile of cannonballs and the United States flag. This bottle was put out at the end of the Civil War to celebrate the end of the Civil War, the union between the North and the South. That's why they call it a Clasped Hands Union flask. And it has definite Civil War ties. Like I said, it was made to celebrate the end of the Civil War.
Whiskey?
Yes, a whiskey flask. And kind of show you, this is what is actually embossed on the bottle, give you a better idea. And somebody say, oh boy, that's kind of not the best rendition of a cannon and cannonballs and so forth, but if you start to notice, the newer the bottles get, the lower the quality gets on the molds. Because more and more the German mold makers are retiring. They're getting old enough that they're retiring, they're not doing that anymore. The first molds that they used for the historical flasks, this 1840s Success to the Railroad, this is much better workmanship than this 1860s Clasped Hands flask. Yes?
How did they get the molds on this plain glass bottle?
Okay, that's a real good question. If you can envision this, this is McCarran's book on American glass. I assume there's a copy of this in the library. It's an excellent book if you want to learn on early bottles, American glass, etc. This is an iron mold, cast iron mold. And there's a pivot point down here where it hinges. And you can see the handle on it here. This happens to be a finished bottle. Should be a handle on this end too where the bottle mold can be brought together. Glassblower takes out a ball of molten glass on the end of his blowpipe, places it inside the mold. There's a boy there that closes the mold. He blows the bottle into the impression inside the mold. When the glassblower knows that is when he's done, only the glassblower knows when he's got the mold full, the boy opens the mold again, takes the bottle out, and then we either use the Pontil method or the newer methods, which they simply finished it off while it was in the mold. The mold itself is cast out of cast iron, and then somebody has to engrave or cut the embossing into that mold. That's where the artesian part of it comes in, the skilled part. So all these bottles that we're showing you have either a cast iron or a brass mold that had to be engraved. So there's quite a bit of labor actually involved with it.
I noticed the flag was backwards from the proper display.
Right. I think that is probably because they ran out of room for the size of the flask and they didn't have enough room to put it the other way. There are flasks that just have the United States flag on them too. They are in the correct position though in this case. Okay, we've got another flask here, and if you look closely at it, it looks almost like a cartoon figure on it. This is a late 1860s, early 1870s flask, and it says for Pike's Peak on it. And this was to promote the gold rush at Pike's Peak, Colorado, which, depending on who you talk to, was either a success or a bust. There were a lot of people who were actually upset over the Pike's Peak gold rush, but they put out a flask to commemorate that or to promote that. And again, the detail, if you compare the bust on George Washington here, there's a lot of details. Curls in the hair, I guess I got the Thomas Jefferson side there. Details in the hair, the suit and so forth. And then you compare that with the details on the Pike's Peak flask, and we almost have a cartoon version of a miner. Now the last flask that I have, and these smaller ones also sometimes are referred to as pocket flasks. This is a pocket flask, and obviously this bottle's not going to stand up. And some of you that collect other types of glassware probably know what kind of glass this is. I don't know if we got any takers on that here or not, what type of glass this is. It's called Nailsea glass. And this is kind of an oddball as far as the flask. This more than likely was a woman's pocket flask because of the shape and the color. Somebody well-to-do, by the way. This was not a cheap bottle back then. This actually is a little bit newer than the bottles I have here. This probably dates to about 1870 or maybe even 1880. It does have a Pontil mark on it, but it's been ground and polished. It's been ground and polished off. So this was not a high production, but a high quality piece. So somebody that was well-to-do, like I said, I'm speculating here, but probably was a lady's pocket flask. Okay, that covers the historical flasks. Do we have any questions real quick about those before I switch gears here to another?
Care to mention value?
I try not to get into values a whole lot, but historical flasks can range anywhere from the common ones run about $40. The more expensive ones, it's just like coins or any collectible, they can run into quite a few dollars. So I didn't bring any high-powered or high-dollar stuff because when you transport things, you hope you don't drop anything. So.
Is that last bottle blue?
Which one?
The last bottle.
The lady's flask.
The lady.
Tell you what, I'm going to bring that around so you can see the actual color of it. Let you pass that over there. It's a combination of actually two different colors. Now I was a little concerned about the lighting, so we brought the light box. So the bottles I have pictured here in front of the light box are food bottles, and that's another real common category. Unfortunately, the earliest bottles were the best ones. You get into food bottles from the 1880s, 1890s, and 1900s, they are very, very boring, plain, nothing very fancy about them at all. The two aqua bottles are referred to as Cathedral pickle bottles, because if you look at the arches, they are directly resembling the cathedral arches in a church. And again, this was a bottle that was not designed to be thrown away. When you were done with it, you could use it as a vase for flowers and so forth. In fact, that's what a lot of these ended up being used for. In fact, this one, this larger one, was found down in Van Buren County at an auction on a hay rack, and it still had the water stains in it from where it had been used for a vase. You could tell that. This particular one has a very pronounced open Pontil mark on it. And it's a smaller bottle, probably didn't contain pickles, but probably had cherries or some other type of food stuff of that size. Smaller mouth, so we had to have a smaller type of food. The large one here, when you think about it, that's a lot of pickles. This one is a pickle bottle because of the size. This one is not Pontiled. It is late 1860s, though, just after the Pontil era. And you can see the fancy cathedral arches on it. This one isn't quite as fancy as the other three. That's because this is the label space. This is where the manufacturer put his label. And these come in colors of dark green and different shades of emerald green. There's some fantastic colors for these cathedral bottles.
Had they gotten away from the cork for closing the top?
This took a large cork that was probably sealed off with wax paper and a wire. Now this particular container is not really a bottle, it's more of a jar, but I brought it just because it's kind of a neat variation. Plus it's milk glass, which gives me another color to show. Milk glass, by the way, they had to give zinc oxide in the glass batch, or tin oxide, to get that color. This particular one is in the shape of an owl. And I have the original lid on it, which has an eagle embossed on it. And then there was a metal band that tightened down on it, similar to a fruit jar. This contained mustard. And when you were done with it, again, you had a neat container that you could set on the shelf. A lot of these things were designed to not be thrown away. Like the historical flask, majority of those weren't thrown away. They were kept for years and years and years and handed down.
Is that newer than this milk glass? Is that newer?
The milk glass owl probably dates from the 1890s. That's one of the exceptions to the newer food bottles. So they were using the owl as a marketing device to sell their mustard. They were hoping they didn't care how good the mustard tasted because they're buying it for the jar. So. I've got one example of red glass to show, and I've got a lot of categories here today, but I didn't bring much in the way of whiskey bottles other than historical flasks. Didn't bring any of the brewery bottles, and I didn't bring any drugstore bottles today. That, like I said, those are just three of the other facets that I could have brought. This is a back bar bottle. It has the word Scotch engraved in the glass, which this is not a production bottle. This is a specialty bottle. It's obvious to see the color of it, the red glass. Now, we've probably got somebody that knows here, what oxide do we need to get the red glass? Gold. Gold. We heard a couple there. I'll take the gold oxide. It takes about 1 ounce of gold oxide to make 60 pounds of red glass. It's expensive glass. That's why you don't see too many bottles in the red color. Again, this was a back bar bottle for a fancier saloon. Your run-of-the-mill average saloon probably didn't have these sitting on their back bars. This next group of bottles I'm going to talk about are referred to as a group of medicines, but more specifically they're called bitters. And they are supposed to be medicine bottles. And a real brief history on why we have bitters bottles is because the United States government imposed a tax, a rather heavy tax, on liquors and whiskey. So we'll come up with a medicine that has an alcoholic content, and we'll call it bitters. And the bitters market was highly competitive. And they came up with all types of marketing devices and slogans. And in this case, with the log cabin bottle, this is a Drake's Plantation 1860 bitters. They put the date on there, but that's not how old the bottle is. The bottle is actually 1870s. There are lots of different cabins. They also use lots of different colors, lots of different bottle forms. There's a bitters bottle in the shape of an Indian queen, bottles in the shape of fish, bottles in the shapes of ears of corn, all types of different shapes, all types of fancy embossing. In fact, the guy that came up with this, he embossed on this S.T. Drake's, and S.T. was not his first initials. Drake was his last name, 1860, and then he put an X on there, and then bitters. So everybody's saying, well, what's the ST start with? And what's the X stand for? And it was a big deal to try to figure out what he had embossed on this bottle. And they finally said, oh, that must mean Drake started trade, ST, started trade with $10. That was the biggie that they came up with. And of course, Drake said, oh, that, they weren't even close. He said, I just put that on there so they'd wonder what it meant. And it worked pretty good because this was one of the more successful bitters bottles. I've got a label example here. And of course, it's hard to find bottles with original labels. But when you do, it's always kind of a plus. This is DeWitt Stomach Bitters. And it says I'll just quickly read the label to see, back then this was impressive, now it's rather humorous, but it says a tonic for improving the appetite, invigorating the system, regulating the bowels, liver and kidneys, also for curing dyspepsia, heartburn, and sour stomach. And it's also an invaluable aid to persons in delicate and feeble health, restoring strength and vigor to worn-out constitutions. You have to think, and it's not that much different today. People back then were very gullible as far as believing what the medicine people would put out. They trusted them. Well, that was their first mistake. You know, they put all these wild claims on here, and the people that really knew that were buying the bitters, they were buying it for the alcohol usually, because Drake's Plantation bitters contained about 45% alcohol. Now you translate that, you double that number, that's 90 proof. So yeah, they probably felt the medicine was doing something, I'm sure. So. Now this bottle's a little closer to home. This is Black Hawk stomach bitters. The Black Hawk is because this particular bottle comes from Rock Island, Illinois area. So they played on the Black Hawk name. It's got a soldier here slaying a serpent or a winged dragon or something on front of the label, which is pretty. You know, it's a neat graphic on the label. They tried to make them as attractive, but the thing is, this is almost identical to a $1 million seller, Dr. J. Hofstadter stomach bitters. There are millions and millions of dollars sold of Dr. J. Hofstadter stomach bitters. This label is almost identical to his. There were lots of copycats trying to play on the name. This one has the alcohol content right on it, 30%. So it wasn't quite as potent, but maybe that's why they weren't in business as long. I don't know. Anyway, there are probably close to just a little over 2,000 different bitters bottles that were made between 1850 and 1910. So there's a lot of collectors that collect just bitters bottles. Okay, we have any other questions about the bitters? I'm going to shift gears here again. And I'm going to show a few bottles here that are not bitters, but they are medicinal. But they may not be any different than the bitters. And as we put these bottles up here, we will see some of the different means that they use to promote their product. This is just a very, very brief cross-section of medicinal or medicine bottles. Majority of medicine bottles are in aqua glass, this color glass. Most bottles are that color, medicine bottles. I tried to get a few more of the flamboyant examples that people use for marketing purposes, which means their product probably wasn't any good, but their marketing was very good, so they sold a lot of their products. This particular bottle is a beautiful teal green or teal blue, and it's Morris's Perfected Emulsion. And to probably give you an idea what this medicine was for, it's probably similar to a milk of magnesia type of medicine. This bottle is, of course these bottles are always neat. It's Warner's Safe Remedies Company. It has an embossed safe on it. This one's kind of nice because it has the original label on it as well. William H. Warner was a safe salesman in the 1870s. He saw the money. This guy's a salesman. He's good. Saw the money that was being made in the medicine industry, and he started his own medicine company in 1880. And he called it Warner's Safe Kidney and Liver Cure Company. Now, there's two things here. Safe, must be safe to use, and he has an embossed safe on it because he used to be a safe salesman. He's very good at marketing and advertising. People were buying this bottle, and I'll tell you why. You also think about the 1860s, 70s, 80s, even clear up in the 1920s. Think about the literacy rate of the United States. There's a lot of people that can't read. And mom may send a little boy to the drugstore to get a certain bottle of medicine. He may not be able to read it, but if she says, get the one with the safe on it, well, by golly, he's going to be able to pick that bottle out. He'll know which one that is. Not necessarily children, but grown-ups as well. They'll go back and say, well, that one sure worked good. That one with the safe on it. Can't remember the name because I can't read, but it's got the safe on it, so that's what they buy. Anyway, William Warner is a multi-millionaire. made millions and millions of dollars off the global public with his products. This just happens to be one of them. Now this bottle is a different hue of amber, and it's very unique. It happens to be put out by Mr. Warner. He was very good at marketing. And if you look closely here, it resembles a log, has embossed bark on it. And if you use your imagination a little bit, the lip is supposed to resemble a mushroom. There's also a canoe embossed on it and the word Tippecanoe. This was a stomach ailment medicine. And this was one of his earliest products that he put out in the 1880s. Eventually, he was forced to quit production on this because there's a thing called the Pure Food and Drug Act that came about in 1906. And when that happened, all the medicine companies had to reveal the contents of their products. When they analyzed what was in Tippecanoe, it was 98% cheap rum. So he was making money selling cheap rum. They were quadrupling the price, and many times 5 to 10 times the price they were getting back on their investment just by using a fancy bottle. Now the green one here, this is kind of attractive, but they've got a kind of a neat embossing on it. This is LQC. Those are his first 3 initials. I don't know why, but in the 1870s and 80s, a lot of them had 3 initials, their first, middle, and another middle name. I am not sure what the story is on that, but a lot of them had 3 initials instead of just 2. LQC Wisterts Pine Tree Tar Cordial. So that tells you where some of the ingredients came from, and they have the embossed pine tree on it. You hear the term patent medicine from time to time. Most of these medicines weren't actually patented. This one has patent 1859. From research that I've been able to locate and from other people, this one wasn't patented either. They can emboss anything they want to on the glass, so and the public will buy that. So we're going to skip this one for right now. And of course, this one, we got a neat color, the cobalt blue glass, cobalt oxide, New York Pharmaceutical Association. This is lactopeptine, the best remedial agent in all digestive disorders. And they got a lot of embossing on this bottle. And again, the color probably helped sell this bottle. And we've got this small one. It happens to be the same color, cobalt blue, and it's got a nice label on it. It is embossed on the back, gargling oil. Front it says gargling oil, liniment, family use, 44% alcohol. It says for external use only. How they came up with gargling oil for external use, I'm not quite sure, but here's another millionaire. This Merchant, that was his last name, C.W. Merchant. He was a millionaire. He even had his own baseball team in the New York area. So, now this is one of the newest bottles I brought. In the 1880s, 1870s, there was a bottle in the shape of a fish. It was called the Fish Bitters. And we've talked about the bitters. This bottle was made by the Eli Lilly Company, and it dates from 1920 to 1929. That's the time span they used this bottle. It came in 3 different sizes. This is a medium size, and they also had a little 3-inch tall sample, a salesman's sample that they'd leave with the druggist. Those are kind of hard to get. This one has the original label on it. It says cod liver oil. Now that may bring back some good memories for some of you. And in case you've forgotten, I've brought some in case you want to get a sample. So we've got some genuine castor oil here, cod liver oil. So just in case anybody wanted to bring back those good memories. So anyway, the Lilly Company was using this fish bottle to hopefully deter the attention span of the young boy or girl to look at the bottle and not be aware of what he was getting from the bottle. So. Okay, that about covers it on the national scope here on medicines. We'll have an Iowa medicine show here in just a little bit. But before I switch gears again, do we have any questions about the medicines?
Did you have a Lydia Pinkham bottle?
Oh yeah, we've got several. She was another millionaire. She did she was the American wives' hero. So she sold a lot of bottles of her medicine.
Well, Listerine is still with us.
Yep, Listerine has been around for a long time too.
It's 25% alcohol.
Oh, I forgot a small medicine bottle here. It says Dr. Welch's inhaler medicine. And you know, if you start to look at this bottle, kind of looks like a nose if you look. You know, and you look at that bottle, it is in the shape of a nose. And inhaler medicine, that pretty much tells us. And there are lots of inhaler medicines. I'm not quite sure how this one used, whether you inhaled directly from the bottle, which probably was the way it was done, but kind of a unique shape. But this bottle I haven't been able to find much information on, but we've got a nose bottle, which is kind of different. Now from your schoolhouse days, we've got a few ink bottles to show. And you probably didn't have too many of these in your schoolhouse, but we've brought some different colors. This is called a cone ink, and that's because of the shape, so it wouldn't tip over very easily. A lot of times these bottles are made in the color of the ink that they held. That's why you have the different colors of the ink bottles. So there's a cone ink from the Carter's Company. Here's an amber one, which most likely held brown ink. And then we have a cobalt blue ink bottle, which more than likely held blue ink. Now we have some larger ink bottles. These are the storage bottles. You wouldn't actually dip your pen from these bottles. These were kept in the storage area or the closet. This is SS Stafford's inks, and when you look at this bottle, it has a pouring lip that they tooled on there. So when the smaller bottles became empty, you simply refilled it from the larger storage bottle. They call these master ink bottles. You didn't actually dip your pen from them, but just for storage purposes only. Again, they use the colors to coincide with the different colors ink, but the most common color for ink bottles is the aqua color again. The colors like this are actually kind of hard to come by. This is an earlier 1880s master ink bottle in a different shade of green. And if you look closely, you can see where they've pinched in the lip here for the pouring lip. We'll pass this around. I think everybody's pretty careful. I trust everybody. So we get two hands on it, that's a good. I have three small bottles up here. I'll kind of hold them up so you can see them. We'll probably pass one of them around here so you can get a little closer look at it. This particular group that I have here, it's a small group, but it's a pretty popular collectible group, and these are poison bottles. And the theory behind the poison bottles, they did several things to try to separate this group of bottles from all the others. They used bright colors. Predominantly cobalt blue is what most poison bottles are made from, almost all of them, not all but most. This has a series of raised ridges around the bottle. Now there's two reasons for that. Again, go back to the 1880s, 1890s. What are your lighting techniques? No. Kerosene lamps, usually, unless you're well-to-do and you have the gas-lit house. Even and so, the lighting's not always the best. In a dark closet, you grab a bottle out of the closet. The ridges were to alert you that you had a hold of a different type of bottle. Instead of a smooth surface bottle, you feel the ridges. The stopper has rather pronounced points on it. In fact, they're rather sharp. And the stopper has the word poison embossed on it. They even went so far as to make bottles in the shape of a skull in cobalt blue. And they have the word poison written across the forehead of the skull. This small bottle's from the Owl Drug Company out of San Francisco. They have an embossed owl on it and the large word poison. It's a triangular shaped bottle, which is kind of unusual, but again, they use the odd shape and the bright color to try to tell you, hey, you've got something different. And this one's probably has the best warning. It has the hobnails on it, the raised knobs, has the word poison on it. And if you use your imagination here, it is in the shape of the old style coffins. It's called a coffin poison bottle, as if to warn you of where you'll end up if you take the contents.
What would they do with the poison?
Either for rodents or insects. Certain druggists use poisons in making whatever, I don't know, certain paints and so forth. Some things, you know, it wasn't supposed to be taken internally. It was one way of keeping them separate.
Strychnine was the most strict.
Exactly, exactly. Now the only problem with the poison bottles, the bright colors attracted children. That's why they quit with this style bottle. The bright colors, the children like the bright colors, so kind of a down note there, but that is why there was the demise in the cobalt glass for poison bottles.
About when did they quit having them?
1920 seems to be the cutoff date. That's about the time that they stopped. Poison bottles generally date from 1880 to 1920. So.
How far back does cobalt go?
Cobalt, there are a handful of historical flasks that are cobalt blue, which are extremely rare. When we get to soda bottles, there are cobalt blue soda bottles from the 1850s. So the actual cobalt glass is a little older than you think. It's kind of surprising. Okay, we're going to have another medicine show here. This time it's from Iowa. And you'll see it's been toned down a little bit because we're not going to have the outlandish colors, but we will have some pretty outlandish claims. Iowans were second to none in marketing their products and as far as the claims that they had. We've also got some amusing instructions on some of these. There's a famous saying with the medicine industry, and if your product was good for man or beast, then you had a double product that would sell well, and that's one of the more humorous claims. Good for man or beast, so you not only could use it on your cattle and horses, but if you had a sore throat, by golly, you could use some that night too, and you'd be well also. One example is from the S.F. Baker Company out of Keokuk. This is Baker's Liniment, which has an alcohol content of 37%, by the way. It says for the relief of sprains, bruises, cuts, and wounds, neuralgic and rheumatic pain, stiff-necked, inflamed joints, simple sore throat, and for all purposes where a liniment may be useful. That pretty much covers it all if you're a human being. And then it has for animals, the list of things that will take care for animals. So they have both cures on the same bottle. And we have a rather colorful label here. They're playing on the Indian image here. And by the way, there are people that just collect Indian bottles. There are lots of Indian medicines. This particular one, Oxide tonic with the very colorful lithograph of the Indian on it, a superior laxative tonic. This particular one's from the Manhattan Medicine Company in Des Moines. And again, they use the label to sell their product. There's another Indian medicine from Iowa. It's the Seminole Indian Medicine Company from Boone. Anybody know how many Seminole Indians are ever in Iowa? Not too many. American public doesn't know that. It says Indian on the medicine. It's got to be good if it's an Indian medicine. So, this is another biggie from Iowa, the Chamberlain Medicine Company. They were huge. It was another multi-million dollar company out of Des Moines. This is Chamberlain's colic, cholera, and diarrhea remedy. When you think about it, diarrhea actually had a high rate of death back from the Civil War days even up into the 1890s. So it was actually a pretty common cure. We think about that today and think, boy, you're joshing me, but actually it was pretty deadly to get that back then. But anyway, I'm going to read some of the contents here, and it may surprise you. These were legal drugs at the time. 1 fluid ounce of this medicine contains 48% alcohol. There's your proof content. 19 NIMs of chloroform and 1.99 grains of opium,
There's your cure.
which at that time was a legal drug. Opium was a legal drug. It has the dosage for adults as well as children. So we wonder about the longevity of some of these medicines, and that'll tell us why.
Mike, isn't that what laudanum would be?
Is that right?
Right.
Okay, that would make sense. You could buy a bottle of just laudanum over the counter.
And there's a lot of those bottles.
Right, exactly. I've got a product from Fort Dodge here. It's Menthol-Ease, and I really like this one because of the one side on it. Grandma knows Menthol-Ease is good for colds. We got a picture of Grandma on there, by golly. This one's got to be a good product. Menthol-Ease is good for colds because it contains goose grease and turpentine. By golly, you better not fake a cold or the old Menthol-Ease is coming out. And by golly, we've got some Menthol-Ease if anybody here needs a whiff. So this is the real stuff. So
Where did you get that? Is it in the bottle?
sometimes you're lucky enough to find the contents. An old drugstore will be selling out, and there'll be this remote little corner where they've got medicines that just keep getting pushed back over the years, and pretty soon you got a time capsule. And it doesn't happen very often, but. Got a kind of an interesting bottle here from Winterset. It's the Scarless Remedy Company. They were successful for about 30 years. This is a Scarless brand, white diarrhea and cholera remedy. It's actually for chickens. Most of their products were for livestock, but as the name implies, they had a healing liniment for barbed wire cuts and so forth. The Scarless Remedy Company, they got in a little trouble over that. In fact, they had a lawsuit brought on by the government saying, hey, your products really aren't healing scarless. You're either going to have to change your name or we're going to have a lawsuit here. So just soon after World War I, around 1920, their name was changed from Scarless to the Starless Remedy Company. So they had a little name change there. That's kind of forced on them by the government. But then they finally sold out around 1929. Got a couple of packaged medicines here. There is a small bottle inside here. This is from the Chamberlain Medicine Company in Des Moines also. Chamberlain's stomach and liver tablets. And every now and then I give presentations at the grade school, and I always like to bring this one because on one side it says, just what you need when you feel dull and stupid after eating. So, yeah, that's a good selling point, I guess. But. We got one more Des Moines product here, and this company wasn't in business very long. After I read the instructions, you'll probably see why. This is the Sino Healing Powder for wire cuts, galls, etc. There's a powder inside here. This hasn't been opened. There's no bottle, but it is a medicinal. That's why I have it in my collection. I'm going to read the instructions here, and then maybe you'll figure out what's going on. There's also all these testimonials on the back side of the box, so if they read this, they say, oh, well, this guy says it's worth its weight in gold. I would not be without it. Your powder is okay. The finest thing I ever saw. Well, with testimonials like that, it must be a good product. Here are the instructions. This powder will cure the worst cuts without leaving a blemish. Do not use anything else. You will have no proud flesh no matter how bad the wound. No scars, in other words. Instruction number 1, do not wash the wound. Okay. If the muscles are cut, leave them alone. They will grow back together. Do we have any doctors or physicians in? Only protect them with Cino powder wherever the skin is torn or flesh exposed. People are buying this product and reading these instructions, and for heaven's sakes, we hope they didn't buy too much of it, so especially if they had any kind of a severe cut. There is a medical pamphlet from this Dr. Baker from the S.F. Baker Company in Keokuk, and it's full of all kinds of home remedies, and one of them is a cure for a bloody nose. And I don't want to gross anybody out, but the cure for a bloody nose was to roll up a piece of fat bacon and shove it up into the nostril to try to get the... Now, I really can't picture myself doing that, but these are the instructions from Dr. Baker, and I suppose I'm not sure. As far as I can tell from my research on Dr. Baker, he wasn't an actual doctor. So, now this isn't a medicine, but it's from a company that supplied a lot of drugstores with medicinals. It's from the Churchill Drug Company, and they had branches in. First one started in Burlington, then they had another branch in Cedar Rapids. Eventually, they had another branch in Peoria, Illinois. They were a big outfit. This is one of their products, Churchill's Dry Cleaner. So you don't have to take your clothes to the dry cleaner. You can do them yourself. Works in gasoline like soap does in water. So in other words, you add this product to a bucket of gasoline, and that's what you wash all your fine white linens and so forth in. That's what the instructions say. They do have a good safety point on here. At least they were optimistic enough about that to put that on there. It says, highly flammable, keep away from fire. So I guess if you have a bucket of gasoline, that would be good instructions. So. Okay, do we have any questions about the Iowa medicines? Like I said, I just brought a small sampling, and the Iowa medicines, you can go on and on. There were lots of people that tried that, and some of them were very successful.
When my father was a very young man, the family was going to the circus, and they sent him to the field to get the horses, and he rode one horse and led another. The horse got too close to the barbed wire fence, put his leg open. His mother sewed him up with a needle and thread, and the rest of the family went to the circus and left him home. Healed up pretty good.
They didn't use Cino powder, did they? Probably not. Go to the last segment here, the presentation, and these are all soda bottles. Kind of got a progression here time-wise. And we'll stick a new bottle in there. And we'll put a weird bottle in here. It's kind of out of sync timeline. It really doesn't fit there. This bottle actually should be down in here. Soda bottles have been around since the 1850s. Most of those bottles, because of the time period, were iron Pontil. Time period I'm starting with, for examples, first one here, the dark green one, is Congress and Empire Springs from Saratoga. This is a mineral water, which is a hot thing again now. Back then, there were lots of mineral springs that bottled their own water, and this was a style bottle. This is a typical 1870s, 1880s mineral water bottle, and almost all of them used these dark colors, and the object behind that was to prevent the sunlight from doing anything as far as altering the contents, the mineral content. But they used attractive bottles, and it was good glass, and they were very durable. So these show up from time to time, but they are neat as far as the color. This particular example is from Christian E. Kleiss from Dubuque, Iowa. He was one of Iowa's biggest bottlers. This particular example is from the late 1860s, early 1870s. It's referred to as a blob top soda. Has this wire bail on it that helps secure this cork. Once the cork was removed, you could either drink from the bottle, if you can imagine drinking from a bottle like this, or you poured your soda out. Most people drank right from the bottle like they do today. The bottles back then, as today, are supposed to be returned. This was a big expense for the bottler to have the bottles made, so they wanted to have their bottles returned, but that didn't always happen. So that was an ongoing problem for the bottler. In fact, sometimes other bottlers would steal other bottlers' bottles and put their label over top of it. Because most people didn't look at what was embossed on it, they just wanted to see what flavor it was and they'd buy it. So that was a big problem also. Around 1878, Fairfield got its first bottling works when H.E. Kinslow came to town. He was a Pennsylvania native, and he used a style of a blob top. Now if you look carefully here, it's kind of got rounded sides. They refer to that bottle shape as a 10-pin. And Fairfield is the only town in the state of Iowa that used this style bottle. And I'm guessing the reason for this is because Kinslow came from Pennsylvania, where a lot of bottlers use this style. So he just adapted that, but it's the only one in Iowa that used that shape. So this is a late 70s, early 1880s soda bottle. Another invention as far as stoppering or keeping the soda fresh so it doesn't go flat were the cod bottles, or the Marble-Stoppered bottles. There's a marble inside here, and there's indentations here, and the reason those indentations are there, so when you're pouring the soda out, it holds the marble here. If it didn't hold the marble, it'd keep going down the lip and you couldn't get your soda out. So that's what these indentations are for. These bottles were expensive to make. Plus, kids loved them. Break that bottle open, you get a free marble. So the bottlers had a big problem with getting these back because kids would nab them and they break the bottle to get the marble. There aren't too many of these that are from the United States, and there's only 2 companies in Iowa that use the cod-stoppered or the marble-stoppered bottle. Most of these are English. That's where most of these bottles are from. And we did have an attempt at a marble-stoppered bottle from the small town of Beacon, which is up by Oskaloosa. And this is a unique bottle. In fact, there's no other like it in the United States, or from Europe for that matter. It's a screw top bottle. When you think about screw tops, you think, well, that's a new bottle. Screw tops have been around since 1858. That's when the screw top was patented. However, not very many bottlers or any of the medicine companies, they preferred to use the cork top because it was cheaper. William Beardsley, he was a druggist in Beacon, and he came from England. He immigrated from England in the 1870s, came to Beacon. He's a druggist, and lots of druggists sold soda water at the soda fountain. He came up with his own soda, designed his own bottle, and I found the patent for this up at the Iowa State Library. They have a great patent library up there, and I found the patent because it has the patent date on the bottom, patent May 12th, 1885. I looked it up. They had a picture of it and everything. This is supposed to be a marble-stoppered bottle. The problem is when he got the bottles from the glass house, there weren't any marbles inside of them. And you can't put the marbles in the bottles after they're done. It doesn't work that way. The bottle has to be made with the marble inside of it. So anyway, he gets a shipment of bottles and there's no marbles in them. So they aren't going to work. But the way it worked, supposedly, was the marble inserted up here on a rubber gasket, and then the screw top went on, that sealed it. These indentations worked the same way as the indentations on the other bottle, so when you poured the soda out, the marble rested against the indentations. But no marbles, no soda bottles. These were all put in the basement of his drugstore. Drugstore was burned down when he was away on a fishing trip. Actually, it was a small storage building behind the drugstore. This building burned down while he was on a fishing trip, and they pushed all this in on top of the bottles. Several years later, in fact, this is 1970s, Mom comes home from work, finds her 2 boys in the backyard, big hole in the ground. Dog had been digging there and dug up some glass. The boys started exploring. they've got a pile of bottles around, and there's this huge hole in Mom's backyard. Mom flips out and then finds out that, hey, we can sell these bottles because they're old. They found the exact location of where that basement was of the old drugstore, completely by accident. So that's how these bottles came to light. By the way, William Beardsley's son, right, that's the same one. Ended up being governor of Iowa.
Graduated from Birmingham in 1919.
That's right, because William Beardsley, when he left Beacon in 1903 or somewhere in there, moved to Birmingham, Iowa.
He was killed in a car wreck, wasn't he?
Right.
Right, Shane, the governor was, yep. Okay, we have another style of bottle. This one is from Alex Easton, who was a bottler in Fairfield. He bought out Kinslow's bottling works. This is called a Hutchison style stopper. If you can see that stopper, it's kind of almost a figure 8, and on the end of this is supposed to be a rubber gasket. This stayed in the bottle. They filled it with the soda, pulled the stopper up so the rubber gasket sealed against the top of the bottle, and then they inverted the bottle. And the reason they did that is so the soda would keep the seal wet. If the seal dried out, you lost the fizz, and we all know what it's like to drink a flat bottle of pop. So that's the way they kept these sealed and kept the pressure inside of them. The bottles are shipped upside down. Shipping boxes have holes in the bottom of them for the necks to set in, just like this. And that's the way the bottles are shipped. In fact, a lot of bottles will have the initials on the bottom of them so they can identify their bottle simply by looking at the base. Mr. Easton didn't do that, though. He just had his embossing on the front. Now, if you can envision this, bottlers work on production. The stoppers don't come out when they get the bottles back. When they're returned, they push the bottle back, shoot some water in there under pressure, swish it around, dump it out, put some soda in, pull the stopper back up, it's ready for sale again. Now, after about 10, 15 times, you can imagine the kind of buildup that's going to get on that stopper. They didn't take these stoppers out and wash them each time. And that was also one of the downfalls of the stopper. They weren't very healthy. Even so, it was around for about 25 years. It took them that long to get rid of it. I talked about keeping the seal wet. We've got a bottle here that won't stand up, and it is a soda bottle. It's called a round bottom soda. And the reason they have round bottom sodas is this one was sealed with a cork. And since the bottles were shipped and stored in a horizontal position or even upside down, the cork never dried out. And to help prevent them from setting up so the cork would dry up, they put a round bottom on it. So you couldn't set it up even if you wanted to. But when these were served in soda fountains or in restaurants, they had special holders for them at the table. And they'd bring it, and this special holder had set on it. And of course, collectors love to find those. Those are really hard to find. This particular one's from Chesterman and Barrow out of Lamar's, Iowa. It's the only round bottom soda from Iowa. This is a newer soda bottle. Takes the, if I can get it off, the crown cap, which we're probably very familiar with, white soda. That's what this particular one was. The crown cap came about in 1892. That's how long it's been around. That's a long time. It took a while before it caught on, though. It wasn't until about 1905, 1910 before it caught on big time. And because of the crown top, that's why the Hutchison stopper was put out of business. One, because of health reasons. Two, because this was a superior and cheaper fastener. Now, this particular bottle, Fairfield FCBW. FCBW stands for Forest City Bottling Works. And a lot of people don't realize that Fairfield is, or at one time was referred to as the Forest City. Most towns, if you can envision this in 1860s, 1870s, massive building going on, lots of houses being built, lots of progressive things going on, lots of timber being cut down. The forefathers of Fairfield had the foresight to start a tree planting campaign to replenish all those trees. In fact, we had so many trees in the late 1880s and 1890s, we were dubbed the Forest City. Mount Pleasant is the Iris City, and Fort Madison is the Gate City, Dubuque is the Gem City, things like that. Each town has its own little nickname. Fairfield's is a Forest City. Now, the problem with that is a lot of times the mail get confused. We'd send bills to the Forest City Bottling Works and up in Forest City, Iowa, up north. And we have the newer one, the Forest City. This time it's spelled out, Forest City Bottling Works.
How old is that one?
This particular bottle probably is 1920s. Then the newest bottle that we have here, this is what bottles eventually evolved to, and we know what we have today, but this is a Cheer Up that was bottled by the Fairfield Beverage Company out of Fairfield. So this was one of the last bottles that was privately bottled here in town for the
I
bottling work.
bought off from that company up as late as 58.
58.
I don't know how much longer it lasted after.
This particular bottle is 1955, so it'd fit right in. So.
Remember the name of the family who owned that business?
We probably have some people here that can tell you that, and I think maybe Gene can tell you. I knew at one time, but it's newer, so it didn't stick in my head. I strictly try to keep with 1920s and earlier as far as the history. I've also got a little time here to plug the book that I've kind of talked about. 12, 13 years ago, I decided we need a book on Iowa bottles, the druggist bottles, the beer, the soda, bitters bottles from Iowa, because there was no such reference book for that. So I started this about 12 years ago. I thought I'll be done in about 5. That's how long it should take. And 12 years later, we finally got it completed. And this is a reference book on all the known embossed bottles from Iowa. The labeled only examples, in other words, a plain bottle that has only a label on it but no embossing, those aren't included in here. But drugstore bottles, beer, soda, ink bottles, bitters bottles, medicine bottles are included in this book. 676 pages of information. There's a lot of historical information. We've also got a section that deals with some of the prettier bottles, the color bottles from Iowa. And you can see there's some nice greens and blues. If we had them here, we could put them in front of the light box. And then pages and pages of historical information. Of course, Fairfield's included there as well. All with original line drawings, which, by the way, I did all 1,800 of them. They're in the book. So we got a little bit of time involved with that also. Plus, every now and then we ran across a great ad, and we incorporated those in the history as well. So we have a 2-volume. We have a 2-volume softbound edition that we've had really good sales with. And then we also have the hardbound version, which is nicer for libraries and so forth, which is 1 volume. And these are going pretty fast. We're almost out of these.
Who did that book with you, Mike?
Tom Southard, he's an old partner of mine from way back. We started talking about this on the way home from a bottle show, and we thought, well, you know, this won't be any big deal. We'll just start getting the history, make some drawings, and we'll be done 5, 6 years. And like I said, a lot of things happened in between. I kind of took the brunt of the project, and then it kind of became a personal goal to get this thing done. I wasn't going to let it get the better of me, and I said, I've got to get it done. So I started putting in quite a bit of time and finally completed it last spring.
Here.
No, he lives in Des Moines. When I lived in Osceola, when I taught school in Osceola, it was just 40-minute drive, so we would drive back and forth quite a bit. So, any other questions about the bottles?
Do you have records of a bottling company from Lamar's, S. Nuderman or Neuderman?
Sure do. Yep,
I found one of his once. I sold it to a bottle collector.
Oh, is that right? Yep, he's.
One of those where the cork goes down in.
Yep, those.
They say that where the name pop bottle came from.
Yeah, a lot of times that's what they say is one of those old stories that when they pulled the cork out of the soda bottles, it made the pop noise, and that's where take it for what it's worth. It's a good story, so we usually say, yeah, that sounds good. Well, that's how pop got its name. But
Tell us how much your books are.
how much the books are? The softbounds are $43, and that's for both volumes, and the hardbounds, those are expensive to have hardbound. Those will run $74. And there's also a dust jacket that comes with those. So, yeah, the S. Nuder, he moved to Des Moines after he sold out in Lamar's.
I was on page 261.
Oh, you did look it up, okay.
I think it must be the same guy.
Yep, it's the same one. Yep, good deal. Any other questions? Or information that I
You
can.
have one from Levi Cross from Akron.
No. A soda bottle or a druggist bottle?
He had a bottling works for a soda water.
Oh, okay. And if it happened to be this one covers time period from 1846 to 1915, so there's possibility.
Might have been later than that.
Right. That's why there's possibility he may not have been put in there. So.
Are you gonna say anything about where you find a lot of your bottles?
Oh, we could save that for another program probably, so after we're off the air here. Anyway, I appreciate you coming out on a cold day in January for the program, and I hope you learned a little bit today, and hopefully we've enlightened you a little bit about antique bottles, giving you a little more appreciation about old glass containers. So thanks a lot.
In closing, I'd like to say each Sunday, the first Sunday of each month, we do have a program up here at the Carnegie Historical Museum, and we invite everybody to come up the first Sunday of every month, usually at 2 o'clock. We have things planned all through the spring, and we usually close up during the summer and then start back in the fall. If you know of anybody that would be interested in giving a program at the museum, we'd like to know about it. We like to feature some things that we have in the museum, and we do have some bottles in our Fairfield section up above that show some of the early soda bottles from Fairfield. It's been a pleasure knowing Mike for several years now, and we do some things together, and it's always fun to come up with a new little history thing. It's one of the things Mike has told me in the past. One of the challenges is to find something and then to research the history after that, who, what, where, and everything else. So, Mike, thank you very much for the program today. And that concludes the program for the day. Thank you. They're locked up upstairs.